I think my family went skiing for the first time when I was in 4th or 5th grade. My brother wanted to propose to his girlfriend on a mountaintop. So we planned an entire vacation just for him. He chickened out, as I recall, and had to propose later. We traveled to a beautiful skiing lodge in Ruidoso, New Mexico. It was unlike anything I had ever seen before. I was raised in the valley in South Texas area, that dry, brushy, flat desert. These humongous snow-covered mountains, they fascinated me. I couldn't wait to get out there and go skiing. What I discovered is that skiing is pretty hard. Even after a full day of the beginner's class. Pizza to slow down, French fries to speed up. Yeah, I got it. We all fell down more than a few times. My dad tumbled down practically an entire mountainside. But nothing was as difficult as our first time to exit the ski lift. The ski lift is both a blessing and a curse. The goofs running it all say the same thing. Just stand up and let the lift push you. But that never works. My first time on the ski lift, I stood up, immediately crashed to the ground, and I dragged my sister down with me. The people behind us crashed into us, and we took all of them down. This went on for a few more lifts, until finally they shut the whole thing down to clear the carnage. I had to do the army crawl of shame to the side until somebody could help me back up on my feet. And it was embarrassing to say the least. As humbling as a ski lift is, especially your first time, aren't you glad they exist? Otherwise, most of us would probably have never gone skiing. I mean, without that ski lift, we'd have to climb the mountain first. We'd have to climb every mountain that we wanted to go down. And, some mountains are pretty hard to climb. In fact, our reading for today talks about just such a mountain. In Psalm 24, we discover the mountain of the Lord. Our reading today said the hill of the Lord. The mountain of the Lord, it's higher than any mountain on earth. And there is no ski lift to the top. No, the only way to make it to the top is to start climbing. However, only a certain kind of person, the psalmist says, can make it. Those, he says, who have clean hands and a pure heart. He's covering all of his bases when he includes both the hands and the heart. People are pretty good at deception. I mean, with our hands, we could fool people into thinking we're pretty righteous, but our heart may tell a different story. Sometimes people can be just like that old Aesop's fable about the donkey. Once upon a time, a donkey found a lion's skin. He tried it on, strutted around, and frightened many animals. Soon a fox came along, and the donkey wanted to scare him too. But the fox, hearing the donkey's voice, said, "If you want to terrify me, you'll have to disguise your bray." The psalmist is trying to let us know in his own subtle way that we can wash our hands all we want, but if we don't also wash our heart, well, We'll never make it up that hill. Who else can make it up that mountain? Well, the psalmist says, those who do not lift up their souls to what is false. In other words, idols. He's referring back to the first and second commandment. No other gods and no carved images, or if you grew up with King James Version, no graven images. That's what he's talking about. But I like the way that Sarah's version, which was the NRSV, by the way, I like the way Sarah's version says it. It said, to what is false. It gives us a broader vision than these carved wooden statues of other ancient Near Eastern gods. That's what the Israelites most certainly had in mind when they heard what is false. But today, idolatry isn't little carved images of gods. Idolatry today takes on new forms, hidden forms, sneaky forms. Pastor Timothy Keller once said, sin isn't only doing bad things, it's more fundamentally making good things into ultimate things. Sin is building your life and meaning on anything, even a very good thing, more than God. Whatever we build our life on will drive us and enslave us. Sin is primarily, he says, idolatry. And in his book, The Reason for God, he gives us some examples of that. Some examples of this new sort of idolatry. He says, if you center your life and identity on your spouse or partner, you will be emotionally dependent, jealous, and controlling. If you center your life and identity on your family and children, you will try to live your life through your children until they resent you or have no self of their own. If you center your life and identity on your work and career, you will be a driven workaholic and a boring, shallow person. If you center your life and identity on money or possessions, you'll be eaten up by worry or jealousy. If you center your life and identity on a noble cause, you will divide the world into good and bad, and you will demonize your opponents. If you center your life and identity on religion and morality, you will, if you're living up to your own moral standards, be proud, self-righteous, and cruel. If you lift up your soul to what is false, you are like the man, Jesus says, who built his house on the sand. The rain came, the streams rose, the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. The psalmist is trying to tell us that if we are chasing after idols, basing our life and our trust and our identity on what is false, on sand, we'll never make it up the hill of the Lord. What else do I have to do to make it up that hill? Well, the psalmist says one more thing. He says that those who will make it to the top are those who do not swear deceitfully. It's another reference to the 10 Commandments, this time to number 9 on the list. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. In other words, don't lie. Right? Tell the truth. Society cannot function. Society would collapse if it were full of people running around lying all the time. It's why it's so important that the leaders of our nation and the leaders of our churches and the leaders of your family hold to the truth and don't lie just to get their way. Arthur Miller's infamous play, The Crucible. Have any of you ever had to bear through a high school production of The Crucible? It's terrible. But his infamous play, The Crucible, bears witness to the terrible destruction that false testimonies can have on a society. You know, it's based on a true story. It's pretty accurate too. It's based on true events that took place in Salem, Massachusetts, back when the Puritans were in charge there. In the story, a group of young women begin accusing other members in the society, in their town, of witchcraft. Nobody knows whether it's true or not, but it doesn't matter. It leads to the hanging of 19 people, and it tore the community apart, bearing false witness. The psalmist is conveying a truth about God's rule and God's reign in this world. If you want to make it up to the hill of the Lord, if you want to get up there and stand in God's holy place, you can't be a liar. God will have none of it in His holy dwelling place. So that's what it takes. That's what it takes to make it up the hill of the Lord. Who's up for it? Who wants to climb a mountain today? Well, the question isn't who's up for it. I mean, surely most of us in this room assume most of us are Christians, right? We're all up for it. Who doesn't want to go up the hill of the Lord? Who doesn't want to stand in God's holy place, in God's very presence? But that's not the question. The psalmist doesn't ask who wants to. He asks who can. That's a very different question. I don't know about you, but I've tried climbing the mountain on my own. At certain places, it's pretty steep. Who can climb it? Let's take a poll. If you've never gotten your hands dirty, like if you've never done a bad thing in your entire life, raise your hand. Anybody? Nobody? All right, how about this one? If your thoughts and feelings and what's inside of you have always and consistently matched your outside actions, raise your hand. Not one person in the room? If you've never, even for a moment, if you've never depended and trusted in something other than God, even for a moment, raise your hand. If you've never told a lie before, even one of those small white ones, raise your hand. I'm inclined to believe that the Apostle Paul was right when he said in Romans, there is no one who is righteous. Not even one. If all that's true, then the psalmist's question remains to be answered: who can ascend the hill of the Lord? The answer? Nobody. Nobody. Well, so much for the first half of the passage. Well, what about that second half? Verses 7 through 10. You know that people often separate these two? People often separate and maybe even preach them apart from one another. I'm just not so sure that we can. Because you see, I think the second half of this passage answers the psalmist's question. Lift up your heads, O gates. Be lifted up, O ancient doors, he says. And why? Because the King is coming. The King is coming. In ancient times, that's how you welcomed a king. Whenever there was a new ruler in town, you didn't want him to think you were a rebel. So what did you do? You opened up the gates. You opened the doors. You opened everything for him to come in. More than that, though, you didn't just open it begrudgingly and holler from the back room, yeah, come on in. No, you celebrated the king's arrival. And in ancient times, people would even run out when they saw the king, and they would escort him and welcome him in through the city gates triumphantly. You know, it's most likely where the psalm gets its origin from. It was most likely used when the Ark of the Covenant, which was God's symbol of His rule and His presence. It was supposed to be, this Ark of the Covenant, it was supposed to be the throne of God. It symbolized God's very personal presence right here with these people. It was used, the psalm was used while the Ark of the Covenant was carried into the temple. Do y'all remember this story that during David's reign, when David was king, the Ark is brought into Jerusalem and David throws a party for it? And he's dancing in front of it. Some accuse him of dancing a little too provocatively. But he dances and he celebrates and he jumps up and he clicks his heels because we're escorting the king. The king is coming. That's most likely where this psalm came from, and most likely how it was used in the temple ritual. Lift up your heads. Open the gates. Fling open the doors. Why? Because the king is coming. More than that, I mean, kings were a dime a dozen. The psalmist says that this king is the King of glory. He is the King of kings. He is the King of hosts. Eugene Peterson in the Message constantly calls him the King of angel armies, the King of, well, I mean, look at verse 1 and verse 2. They make it perfectly clear He's the King of everything. Everything in this world and every person in it, it belongs to this King. That's the King who's coming. Can you see Him? Can you see the King coming? He's riding on the clouds. Lift up your head and look, because here He comes. And He's not coming to the gate. No. He's not coming to the gate. He's coming to your gate. He stands at your door and He knocks. Will you let the King in? Will you allow the King of glory to enter your gate? And then the psalmist asks a very important question. Who is this King of glory? Who is this King of glory? I think you know already, don't you? It's Jesus. It's Jesus, our Lord and Savior. Jesus is this King of glory. And here's the interesting about this King. He is the answer to the psalmist's question. Who can ascend the hill of the Lord? Who can stand in His holy place? Jesus is the only one. It's Jesus. He who knew no sin. He with clean hands and a pure heart. The only one. He's the only one who can make it up the hill of the Lord. And He did it by climbing another hill, the hill of Calvary. The hill of the Lord, it may be too steep for you and for me, but it's not for the King of glory. It's not for Jesus. But more than that, the King has also made it possible for you to make it as well. He hasn't ascended to the top and now stares down mockingly at you. Nanny, nanny, boo-boo. I did it and you can't. No, Jesus ascended that hill for you. He did what we could not do in Him, so that in Him we too can make it to the top of the mountain. But how? But how? We've already established it. We can't make it up on our own. How? It is in that very act of lifting up the gates. It is in that very act of opening up the doors. It is in that very act of allowing the King of glory to come into your life. The only way to ascend the hill of the Lord is to open your heart to the King of glory and allow Him to lift you to the top. When I lived in Houston, every now and again I listened to a morning radio show, the Dean and Rod show on the Eagle. Sometimes we get it over here. It's a little spotty. One of their main sponsors was a dating website called itsjustlunch.com. That's it. The goal was simplicity. No big date nights. No flowers. No chocolate. No romantic gestures. No professions of love or weekend getaways. It's just lunch. That's all that's promised. Nothing more. It's justlunch.com. So why do people click on the website? Why do people click on that website if it's just lunch, if that's all it is? Because we know, right? We know that sometimes lunch can lead to some bigger things. We know that sometimes just lunch could be a lot more. You know, sometimes I get the feeling that it's the same with Jesus. Just have lunch. After all, hey, easy, calm down. It's just lunch. Just open the door. That's it. Open the gate. Invite him in for a cup of coffee. That's all. That's it. Invite him in. Allow him a little access in your life. But don't be surprised when bigger things start to happen. Yeah, a lot of things have happened from it's just lunch. Don't be surprised when his rule and his reign begin to stretch into every corner of your life. When you open the gates of your heart to Jesus, don't be surprised when you find your hands suddenly getting a little cleaner. Don't be surprised when you have lunch with Jesus that your insides really do begin to actually match what's on the outside of you. Don't be surprised when things that once caused you to worry and fret just don't anymore, because you've built your house on a much stronger foundation. Don't be surprised when you start to change and when you become a beacon of God's truth and it radiates to all the other people in your life and it affects everybody else in your family and in your community and in your church. Don't be surprised when the King of Glory overtakes every aspect of your being when you open the gates. After all, it's the only way to make it up that hill. When Jesus saw the crowds, well, Matthew says that he went up on a mountain. And he said a whole lot of great things. But he also said this: blessed are the pure of heart, for they will see God. Will you be one of them?